All righty. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Um, I'm Alex Kemp. I'm part of the marketing team here at ShipHawk, and I'm excited to have you here. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm pretty passionate about this. So I'm excited to dive in and talk about weights and dimensions and ShipHawk Dimensioner today. I'm joined by my colleague Allison, one of our account managers. So Allison, I'll turn things over to you to do a quick intro before we jump in here.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks everyone for joining on today. And we're going to talk about ShipHawk Dimensioner and give you all of the details. And I know you guys are excited to hear about it.
Awesome. Allison, what's your background? I'm curious. I know you haven't always been a ShipHawk, so.
So I may look familiar to some of you. I've been on probably hundreds of customer calls at this point. I've been an account manager here at ShipHawk for a little over 2 years now. So chances are, if you're on here, probably worked with you at some point. And I come from the logistics industry. I have a process improvement engineering background, so very big on process and making sure that everything is efficient. And ShipHawk Dimensioner fits right in with that. So I'm going to talk more about that towards the end of the webinar.
Awesome. Alrighty, so before we jump in, just a little bit of housekeeping. A few things to note. First of all, thank you for joining us. You could be anywhere else. I appreciate you taking the time and carving out. Hopefully get some value out of this and really start to have a dialogue and a conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of details that we're not going to be able to go into today. So when we get to the end of the webinar here, we're going to talk about next steps and kind of, if you are interested, where do you go from here? Of course, we will have a recording link that will be shared with everyone that attended live or some people that are going back. We'll make sure that gets out. If you have any questions, and of course, we encourage this too, please drop it in the Q&A box. We have some people in the background that are going to be able to answer questions. We'll also cover a few here on the actual presentation itself. If you have any questions after, if you want to reach out to learn more at shiphawk.com, we'll make sure to get all those questions answered. As far as the agenda for today and what we're going to cover, first, give a little bit of background and context on dimensioners and really talk about the importance of the solution. I know, obviously, a majority of the people here are probably pretty aware of the value of getting accurate weights and dimensions. But there's some use cases that can really be leveraged, and we have a solution that can help in certain instances. And before we continue, I just want to note this is a solution we're very excited to bring to market. We're actively expanding the supported use cases. There are, of course, like any software and any hardware, there are going to be some limitations. So we're going to cover kind of what's currently in development and is in the future with the roadmap a little bit later on in the presentation. But just keep that in mind. I think one thing that is going to be really important as you move forward here is getting feedback from our customers and potential customers of how do you see this being used in your operation? You guys come up with very creative and kind of innovative use cases. We really want to make sure we're building a solution as the roadmap evolves from here. So I'll give a little more context on some details on what's currently covered with Dimensioner, and then Allison is going to walk us through 3 of those potential use cases that I mentioned. All right, so actually, before we jump into this, we have a quick poll. We'd really like to know how many of your products and SKUs do you have accurate weights and dimensions for? And if you answer all and we're all set, then you can probably drop off the webinar. But I imagine the majority of you on here have partial or most, but you're missing a decent amount, or maybe you get them from somewhere upstream, a manufacturer or a supplier, but you don't always fully trust the data. And that's one use case we'll go into a little bit more detail. All right, so that's populating. If you want to fill that out, looks like we've got decent amount of answers so far. You guys are all very prompt on filling that out too. I think we've got pretty much everyone, 80-something% participation rate. So I appreciate that. Kelly, if you want to end the poll, I think we've got a good amount of data here. Let me share the results here. So interestingly enough, a small portion, 5% have none. About 20% have, or sorry, 14% have some, so 20 to 50. And then 70% have most, and then 12% have them from somewhere upstream, but not fully trusting the data. The good news is nobody said nobody said all, we're all set. Obviously something continuously improve. So we'll drill into this, and you know, the good news is with every response here is we can help with the solution. So I'm gonna close that out. Keep going here. So I think most of you probably understand, and especially given how many people have weights and dimensions for some of their products, it really is important in many ways to have these weights and dimensions at an item level. But I think there's two kind of broad areas where it becomes really useful. So one is in the warehouse. So are you making sure that your items are being appropriately stored? Are they put away in the right place? And so we got some bins here. Are you able to look at the item level dimensions and say, this will fit in this bin or it won't fit in this bin? And then probably the aspect that's going to be super important is obviously all of the shipping carriers, they charge by dimensions. They really want to take advantage of that. And not having accurate item level information of what are you putting into the box? What's going out the door? What are you being charged for related to that box? Super, super critical. And obviously we have some solutions that tie into this with our smart packing solution, and Allison's going to cover a little bit more detail. And I think, you know, why this is so hard and why it's so difficult to get is, you know, weights are relatively easy. You can put things on a scale and gather that information pretty quickly, and then you can hook different systems into that. But dimensions are much harder to get. And I think that really comes down to these are the two historical or legacy solutions of how you get dimensions. Obviously, there's many ways to gather it, but it really kind of boils down to either you use a lot of labor and a tape measure, and you hire some interns, or you know have your warehouse staff gather these, or you invest in a pretty costly, usually fixed in place, one part of the warehouse, not very portable, very hard to integrate with, huge dimensioner solution. And I think, you know, both of these had their flaws, obviously. Both of the problems with these are they're both very costly. One on the labor side, and then one on the actual, you know, you've got to put in place this system, and it's got to integrate with stuff, and even the capital expense of getting one of those into your warehouse, and then ongoing operations of that, they're massive budgets, either on the labor side or with a capital expense. And so this means you go not getting your weights and dims, and that's a blocker. That's a problem, because if you don't have the item level information at the very basic, the raw material of what's going into the box, what's going on the pallet, it becomes this blocker further downstream. Now, of course, those are not the only two solutions, and that's what we're talking about today. This is a quote from a customer of ShipHawk, and I'll just read through it here really quickly. We couldn't optimize our shipping rates, and this is a direct quote from a CFO to ShipHawk customer, because we didn't have weights and dimensions. We were able to capture them for 10,000 SKUs in under 2 weeks with two of the devices here. So we're going to dive more into details on what this actually is, and I've got one of the dimensioner devices right here, so you guys can no, I'm not faking it. We're not going to go into a live demo today. Obviously, we want to understand your use case and really dive into how you might use one of these dimensioners, and that's going to be the call to action here on kind of next steps. But I want to give you a little bit of detail on what this thing actually is. There's a hardware component and there's a software component. Obviously, they have to work very hand in hand together. But what this solution is it's a portable handheld device. So it's not one of these big dimensioner solutions that you put in the warehouse footprint. And pretty innovative technology. The team behind this is doing some pretty innovative stuff around basically recognizing what is an item and what's the floor, what's a flat surface, and really distinguishing between the two. It's not perfect, and we'll go into a little bit of the kind of limitations in a few slides here, but these various sensors are capturing dimensions very accurately. I'm not sure if this was a use case, but I actually gathered the height of one of my coworkers using this device, and it was pretty accurate. And then, of course, that integrates back into scales to actually capture the weight as well. And then all of that is going to write back to the ERP, and that's where the software component really comes into play. So obviously pretty high level here. We're going to dive into more details on this, but it really does come down to, you know, kind of three basic steps, which is first, you want to get the dimensions, and, you know, in a demo, you're going to see this too. It basically draws a yellow box around the item. So in this case, we have a lamp. So it's got pretty irregular dimensions, and this is the item level information, obviously. From there, once you have dimensions, you can also get weights, put that on a scale. And then all of that writing back to the ERP in real time. And obviously that can be used for ShipHawk further downstream. That can be used in other ways as well. And that's why we want to write the information back to the ERP at the item level information. So a few of the benefits, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on these. You guys could probably guess where the benefits come in. And it really comes down to being more efficient and being more effective in the operation. And those legacy dimension solutions or the tape measure solution, they're good. I mean, you're able to capture weights and dimensions. It's just the expense that has to go into that, either through the labor or the capital expense. And so that's why we really want to make sure this is the kind of guiding principle of how we're driving the benefits of the solution. Okay, so just a quick note on roadmap, and then we're going to jump into some of these use cases with Allison. Currently, the focus is at the raw material, the raw item level. Maybe material is not the right word, but basically, I have this coffee mug right here. Get the dimensions and weights for that. That is the first focus, because without that, you don't know how to use the smart packing algorithm, which Allison's going to go into. Then you don't know the pallet that it goes on. At this time, at shipping and palletizing, that's in development. We're working on that. But we really wanted to make sure, as phase one, we are capturing at the very item or unit level. We're gathering that first raw material around these are the weights and dims of the item and drawing a cube box around that item, because obviously these need to go into a box at a later time. So again, we're working on what happens when you have a box that's shipping, what happens when you have a box that you want to put on a pallet. Those are future developments. But what we really wanted to focus on as a first raw input is making sure you have basic item level weights and dimensions as a starting point. I did mention also, some limitations. I just want to touch on those from a hardware perspective. Obviously, this device, it cannot work magic. So if items are very thin, like an envelope or under a 1/4 inch, it's going to have trouble reading those. If items are too shiny or transparent, it's going to have some trouble reading those. It's not going to work in all use cases necessarily, and that's why we really want to understand and dive deep with you around your use case and understand more details. And we'll be very transparent with you around, no pun intended, around where it may or may not work. It is a live sensor, and so it cannot perform magic. I was actually trying to get dimensions of the glass here earlier, and it was having some trouble with that, which makes sense. The item the sensor was reading through the glass and couldn't tell what was the flat surface and what was the item itself. But in majority of use cases, it is very powerful. So really need to come down to what items are you actually looking at. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Allison, and she's going to walk through a few potential use cases. Obviously, there's many more that could be used, but these are 3 kind of right off the bat that we're going to walk through.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I felt like that was very informative, and appreciate you going into some of those details about the ShipHawk Dimensioner. So as I mentioned before, I'm an account manager here at ShipHawk. So I am constantly talking to customers, learning about their use cases, learning about their warehouse processes. And so when I was asked to join this webinar, I came up with 3 use cases that I hear pretty frequently in my days of talking to customers that I really think that the ShipHawk Dimensioner would be able to bring value to. So the first use case is really about smart packing and having or not having weights and dimensions and not being able to use smart packing and the benefits that it has. So for those of you that don't know, smart packing is an algorithm that ShipHawk has that takes the known weights and dimensions of your items mixed with the packing materials that you have in your warehouse, and we optimally suggest how to pack and ship that order. It sounds very, simple at a high level, but it's a super complex algorithm in the background. It is determining at every single order the best way to ship it. It's going to configure it as an LTL shipment, and it's also going to configure it as a parcel shipment and decide which way is cheaper and more optimal to ship. So using smart packing is a huge benefit in ShipHawk because you're going to save time processing the shipment. You're not going to have your shipper sitting there making decisions on what packing materials to use. It's going to optimally pack those things and actually tell the shipper how to pack it. It's also going to decrease your shipping cost. So having inefficient packaging, using more packing materials than needed, obviously that's incurring more cost. And then it's also increasing your shipping cost. So all around, it just makes more sense to use smart packing. But the number one limitation I hear from customers is, oh, I wish I could use it. I don't have dimensions on my items. And yes, you can't use it if you don't have dimensions. Another thing I want to call out is that smart packing runs in the background on your e-commerce site. So if you're using one of our plugins like Shopify or maybe Suite Commerce Advanced to provide real-time rates at your checkout, if you're not using smart packing, we are just using the weight, which at a minimum, you have to have a weight in order to get a rate on your website at the checkout. But it's also assuming that everything is going into one box. So if you're a high volume e-commerce seller and you've got one item, two items that are purchased at a time, maybe smart packing isn't, so totally necessary to have running in the background of your rating. But if you've got more like vendor portals where customers are ordering, thousands of dollars worth of things, and you're trying to accurately provide an LTL rate, it is super important to have smart packing running, because that could be the difference of a $200 shipping charge and a $400 shipping charge, which of course is going to end up coming out of your bottom line. So in all, it makes more sense to use smart packing and have more accurate rates so that you can make sure you're always breaking even on shipping, or at least not losing on the shipping rates. So I would say that's the number one use case that I hear, smart packing, but I'll bring you into use case number 2, which is actually about our WMS. So I know there's probably a handful of ShipHawk WMS customers on here today, or maybe you are contemplating adding ShipHawk WMS to your tech stack this year or maybe next year. So I want to call out that in WMS, we have a function called ASRS, which is Automated Storage and Retrieval System. It is basically maximizing the cube utilization in your warehouse. So again, we're going to take the known dimensions of your items, also the known dimensions of the cartons that they're stored in. They're probably, or maybe not stored loosely. And we're going to take the known cube of your bin space and racking spaces and actually suggest for bin put away and replenishment what will physically fit in that space. There's nothing more annoying than showing up at a bin with a whole pallet of stuff just to learn that that bin is busting at the seams and you can't even put it there. Other WMSs don't have this level of technology where it's actually considering space that you can put it in. But of course, this goes all back to having dimensions of the items in the first place. Without that, we can't utilize this function in ShipHawk WMS. Next slide. So that was use case number 2. And then use case number 3 is new items. So over here at ShipHawk, we have a ton of fast growing companies that are constantly adding new items to their product offering, or maybe you're a 3PL model where you're bringing items in for your customers. Nonetheless, at some point as a growing company, you're going to have new items coming in and you're going to need to capture the dimensions of them. It's pretty likely that up until the point when that first new item shows up at your warehouse, we either probably don't know the dimensions of it, or your procurement team has gotten the dimensions from the vendor. But again, back to what Alex said earlier, you may not trust your vendor's dimensions. They may not always be accurate. And in terms of documenting your own dimensions, you may want to capture that with something like ShipHawk WMS. I'm sorry, ShipHawk Dimensioner. So it may be an added task whenever you get new items that your procurement team is asking, hey, can you make sure the receiving guys are, capturing those with a tape measure? Maybe it's a task that your QA team now has when that item goes to QA. Either way, it's added labor, it's an added step, and it would be so much easier if you had this handheld device to just capture those and send it straight to the item record in your ERP. New items also have an impact to smart packing and cube utilization, because one of the things that I hear a lot is, customers adopt ShipHawk, they have they hire a summer intern to go around the warehouse and get all the dimensions so that they can use smart packing when they go live with ShipHawk. And then a couple years go by and they notice that smart packing is not working the way that it used to, starting to throw in random boxes or things. And the reality is that you've probably added new items over time and you've neglected to update smart packing to incorporate those items. So you may just have little things missing, like maybe just the height is missing, or maybe the weight is missing, simple things like that. And so adding ShipHawk Dimensioner into your process of making sure that your new items are captured is going to make sure that you're getting the best benefit from smart packing, and that it's not just that one-time setup, and you're actually continuing to maintain that system. So those are the 3 use cases that I found to be, or what I think would be the most beneficial to use ShipHawk Dimensioner for. I'm sure there's tons of other use cases out there. You probably are sitting here thinking of maybe some that would help you in your warehouse. We would love to hear about those. Like Alex said, we want you to reach out. We'd love to talk to you about your use case and see if this is something that can help you. And then, as Alex mentioned on the roadmap, we're going to be offering ShipHawk Dimensioner for other areas within ShipHawk, not just capturing individual items, but actually capturing, using it at the time of shipping for capturing the box sizes and things like that, pallet sizes. So there's really great things coming in the pipeline with this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Allison. Yeah, I think it really comes down to maybe just kind of 2 things. One is you need to capture a massive amount of weights and dims. You need to go through and capture, everything if you haven't gotten those yet. But to Allison's point too, obviously you guys are launching a lot of new lines, a lot of new products, and there's always going to be workload associated with that. And, you can, receive the item and kind of stop operations and go, okay, I get the item dimensions for this and get the weights for this. Really want to try to put the power in the hands of the operator really quickly and say, okay, got a flag and it came up, I'm trying to receive this item in, and now I have a flag that's saying, basically, I need to get weights and dims for this. Very kind of seamless part of the workflow process. All right, so questions. It looks like there's a few coming in. I want to make sure we try to get through as many of these as possible. We're not going to be able to get through all of them today, and some sound very specific, but I think some of these are pretty broad. So I'm going to go through these. Jonathan in the background has been answering as well, so thanks, Jonathan, for answering those. And just one call out here too. We would love to meet with you and talk to you about your use case and understand more. Obviously, there's many different ways that you can use this, and the 3 that Allison just went through, those are just a few ways that are going to be using this. So Emily asked, can this write back to ShipHawk for the DIMs of parcels to ship instead of item level in our ERP? At this time, that is something we are actively exploring. So we wanted to start out with the raw material, the raw item, get weights and dimensions for those as a first starting point. We are actively exploring shipping, time of shipping, putting it on a pallet, things like that, basically, where getting weights and dimensions is also important. But obviously, as this first critical step is we need to get the item dimensions. Jason asked, if it's writing directly to the ERP, can you name the fields it writes to upon setting? And yes, this is something you can configure, which fields on the item record will be updating within the ERP. So yeah, that's definitely something we do. All right, Richard asked, how large of an item is it able to scan? At this time, the kind of upper limit, and this is based on how accurate of an image that you can get, is 40 inches. So just under a pallet, which is something we're actively exploring how we'd actually get it to read a pallet. But up to 40 inches is kind of the known limitation of how big of an item could be scanned. All right, their questions are coming in fast and furious, so I'll try to keep up with these. And again, we're not gonna be able to answer them all here live necessarily. We'll make sure you get answers for all these. Just seeing if there's any others that are a little bit less nuanced, not super specific. We probably need a little more context on these. Looks like Jonathan is answering. Okay, Roy asked, how is the product licensed? That's a great question. So we really want to have you guys get these into operations and use them on a continuous basis, just as you'd use ShipHawk. And Allison was going through the new items and getting those into. So it is going to be part of contracts. If you're an existing ShipHawk customer, it'll be part of the contract. We'll add it on. If you're a new customer, obviously we'd love to have a conversation on leveraging the broader ShipHawk solutions. But it is going to be licensed on an annual basis. And the goal is to try to get you to use these devices and find value out of them on an ongoing basis. Obviously, if you have a special project or something like that, we'd love to have a conversation with you and try to understand more about your use case. But the goal is to, how do you get one of these, one, two of these devices into your operation, and really start to drive some efficiency. Marilyn asks, can we get a copy of this recording to share with our team? Absolutely, please do. We'll be sending those out shortly after the call. Okay, looks like that's a majority of the questions here. Okay, Roy also asked, are we able to own the device or lease the device? That's a great question. So we are working with a technology partner who is developing the hardware of this. We have added on all of the software components, which is basically retrieving the data, putting it in the ShipHawk cloud, writing that information back to the ERP. It is possible to buy these devices. However, all of that integration is not going to be available. The company that we're partnering with in the background on the actual hardware, they are very talented at using these devices to find weights and dimensions. They are not as talented in working with ERPs and writing that data and information back to the ERP and making sure it's writing back to the right place and then being leveraged from the ERP into ShipHawk solutions. So it is possible. However, there'd be a lot of manual effort around extracting data off the device, getting that back into the system. Really, the goal is to try to help you guys with as much automation as possible from the device, and it's seamlessly writing back to the ERP, which then can be leveraged in ShipHawk. All right, so with that, if you would like to learn more, we really encourage you to reach out. If you're a current ShipHawk customer, please reach out to your account manager. If you are a future ShipHawk customer, if you want to reach out to learn more at shiphawk.com, we will be sure to get you an answer. But again, we really want to talk to you and just learn more about how you might use this solution. These are just a few use cases that we've come across as we're rolling this out to market, but we know there's going to be a lot of creative ways that our customers end up using this. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining. I want to thank Allison for walking through those use cases, and we'll talk to you soon. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.